Hello, and thank you for joining me today for our online programming. My name is Mary Ann Wright, and I'm a 4-H area educator with Lincoln University Cooperative Extension. Let's begin with the 4-H pledge. I pledge my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living, for my club, my community, my country, and my world. Today we are going to be completing a STEM activity that was developed for the 4-H STEM Lab. And what that means is it's available to you. If you go to 4h.org, you can go under the Parent tab and then find the 4-H STEM Lab. And when you go there, you'll find a list of different STEM activities. And so today we're going to be completing the activity Fizzy Foam Fun. So I just went online and I printed my own guide sheet to work from today. Let's talk about what we need to get started in this experiment. The supplies that you need are an empty soda or water bottle. You want to make sure that this is rinsed out and dry. If you don't have a bottle, you can also use just a glass or something like that. You're also going to need some food coloring, some dish soap, and then a small bowl and spoon, a funnel, some hydrogen peroxide, and we're going to be using either 3% or 6% hydrogen peroxide. So if you have hydrogen peroxide in your house, this is probably what you have because this is what we use for first aid needs. But you want to make sure and check the label and be sure that it's either 3 or 6% before starting. You're also going to need a 1/4 cup of warm water. So I've measured that here in my measuring cup. And then we're also going to be using that measuring cup later. And then we also need a package of dry yeast. Now, if you're not familiar with yeast, this can be found in your baking section at the grocery store, so where you might find some cake mixes or flour or things like that. So you want 1 packet of active dry yeast. The only other thing that we need today is just a baking pan, and this we're using for a catch-all. So when we do our experiment, we're not getting our work surface dirty or messy. So I'm going to use this just kind of as a protective layer between my experiment and my table. The first step that we want to do is take our small bowl and go ahead and pour our warm water into the bowl. Next, we're going to add our active dry yeast. You may want a pair of scissors to open up your yeast packet, but what we're going to do is just dump the entire packet right into that warm water. Once I have it in here, I'm going to take my spoon and just stir it around a little bit to make sure it mixes. Now, if you're using this yeast, you can immediately start to smell a particular smell, and you'll probably think of fresh baked bread when you smell this because we use yeast in bread, and that's what makes our bread rise. So by adding our warm water, we are activating the yeast. So this is necessary to get our experiment to work properly. We want to make sure that it's activated, and the warmth for that water does that. So you want to make sure that you're not using cold water because it won't start to activate it, but you also don't want to use really hot water because that will kill our yeast. So just nice warm water to activate that. Now I'm going to set that yeast to the side, and now I'm going to prepare my other materials. Next, I'm going to take my empty bottle and I'm just going to put it in the middle of my baking pan. Then I'm going to take my hydrogen peroxide, and I'm going to be using a 1/2 cup of hydrogen peroxide. So I'm going to pour it into my measuring cup. Now, this is when your funnel is going to come in handy, so I'm just going to put the funnel into my bottle here and add my hydrogen peroxide. Okay. Next, I'm going to use some food coloring. Now, food coloring is optional in this activity. It's just going to make your experiment more colorful. So I'm choosing to use green. So I'm going to add about 4 or 5 drops of food coloring to my bottle here. I'm going to mix it just a little bit. Next, we want to add our dish soap. So any kind that you have, I'm just going to put a good squirt of soap right into my bottle. So now in my bottle, I have my hydrogen peroxide, my food coloring, and my dish soap. So this is a science experiment, so we want to make observations along the way. So look at your bottle, look at your liquid. What do you see? You can record what you find on a piece of paper or in a notebook. Now today's experiment is a chemistry experiment. So we are hoping to get a chemical reaction from our mixtures. And so we are using our solution here, and we are going to be adding a catalyst. So today our catalyst is our yeast. So what that means is our catalyst is going to speed up the process. So naturally, hydrogen peroxide breaks down over time. Hydrogen peroxide is made up of 2 hydrogen molecules and 2 oxygen molecules, so H2O2. And over time, those start to separate and kind of break down. And so we eventually get water and oxygen. H2O is water, and then an extra oxygen molecule. So in today's process, we are going to rapidly speed up that process, and we are going to break it down with our yeast. So we're hoping that when our oxygen molecule comes and kind of breaks out of that hydrogen peroxide, it's going to combine with the bubbles and the dish soap that we have in our solution and create a foaming fountain. So I'm hoping that that is going to happen when we do this. So let's go ahead and try. I think our yeast has been activated, so I'm going to use the funnel again. I'm going to put it right in. Now this is the part you're going to want to make sure that you are using your baking pan here to catch all of this. I'm going to pour in my yeast pretty rapidly, and I'm going to take out my funnel, and I'm hoping that we see a reaction. So let's watch. So you'll start to see that I have foaming bubbles everywhere. So that was a pretty big reaction, and I have green bubbles because I've used my green food coloring, but the hydrogen peroxide, when it was mixed with my yeast, it started to break down and combined with my dish soap to make these foaming bubbles. So this was a success. This is what I was hoping would happen. So now if you're doing this at home, I want you to take note, see what you are looking at, take notes in your notebook, and try to guess what would happen if you change some of the elements. So this reaction is actually called an exothermic reaction, and what that means that when it happens, it actually puts off heat. So you can go ahead and touch your bottle here, and if you do, you'll notice that it's actually quite warm, a lot warmer than when we started, because our hydrogen peroxide and everything was just room temperature when I poured it in the bottle. And even though my water was a little warm, it was not nearly the temperature that I'm feeling right now in my bottle. And so you can do that, and you can also touch the foam. That won't hurt you by touching it. So kind of explore. You're not going to want to eat this or get it in your mouth, but touch it and then use a dish towel just to wipe that off. And now you can record what you find and what you see. Another great way to make this an even more exciting experiment is to have multiple bottles and maybe play around with your hydrogen peroxide. So I told you that you can use 3% or 6% for this experiment, and so what I used is just 3%. So what would happen if I had 6%? Would it make the reaction a bigger reaction? Would it slow down the reaction? So that would be a fun thing to know. Also, you can play around with different amounts of soap that you add. Does that change the amount of bubbles? A good way to mark your experiment is by changing the color of it. So if you have several different bottles, you can denote that the red bottle has this amount of hydrogen peroxide, this amount of dish soap, and so on. And then the green bottle has this, or the blue, and keep going. And that's a great way to keep track of your experiment. You might also want to play around with the different amounts of yeast. What happens if you only use half the packet of yeast? Would it still make the same reaction? Does it make fewer bubbles? So let me know what you find out when you continue this experiment. But this is really a fun way to explore science at home. You don't need very many supplies, and most of them you probably already have in your pantry, and you probably just need to pick up a couple more things at the store. So I hope you will try this and keep experimenting at home. Tomorrow we are going to continue our online learning with another programming video, so I hope you join me again at 1:30 tomorrow. Bye guys.